The discretionary budget is not big enough to make up the shortfall, right? You could cut the discretionary budget to zero and we'd still be in a deficit this year. That's how big the interest payments are.
Hold on. Repeat that for 1 second. So you're talking defense,
no
education.
Money for defense. No
right.
Defense, transportation, education, all of the discretionary budget. Again, Social Security, Medicare is over here in the mandatory bucket. But take the alphabet soup, USDA, FBI, CIA, FDA, all of that, DOD, okay? You could cut that to zero this year and we would still be in deficit.
All right, guys, good first Friday of 2025 to you. I have a great show coming your way, and I don't think you will see this anywhere else. You know, we spent a lot of time in the last one talking about budgets and spending. There's a reality, though, of how things work. And this is kind of the goal of this show, is to make sure that you understand things in a way that you won't hear on any other show. So today, we are going to pull back the curtain on the budget and explain it like no one else does. Can we actually cut spending? Where are we spending the money? We're going to get into all of that with the former director, the White House director of OMB, of the Office of Management and Budget, Mick Mulvaney. Before I do that, guys, it is a new year. And before the new year, I made a decision like I have done in the past. I'm going to get back in shape. I'm going to lose weight. And I found tremendous success through my PhD weight loss, because it's not a fad diet. It's not restrict this, only eat this. It's a lifestyle change. And when you sign up for this, you get assigned a nutritionist that you meet with weekly, and you do weekly check-ins, and they guide you through the holiday season. I was checking in saying, hey, I'm going out a lot. I got this dinner. I've got this plated dinner. And they'll be like, okay, here's what you do before that. Here's what you focus on. Here are the alternatives. I mean, look, that's, if you don't want to get wrapped in all pills and injections, it's about lifestyle choices. And the folks at my PhD weight loss can actually help guide you in a very, very long-term way. It's about losing the weight and then maintaining it. I've told you before, my friend Seb Gorka had huge success with this, and that's why I wanted to get on board with it. You work with a real live person that checks in with you every day. And this is amazing. I mean, what is it? Almost 75% of Americans are overweight. If you really want to make a real change and aren't looking for a quick fix, trust me, the folks at My PhD Weight Loss is the way to go. And if you go to myphdweightloss.com, you can set up an appointment as well. They start you off with some free starter food that comes with the cost of the program. That's amazing, because there's some meals that just I don't have time for, and this is perfect to get you over the hump. So give them a call, 1-864-644-1900, or again, go to myphdweightloss.com. All right, guys, as I said, we have a $36 trillion debt. Trillion with a T, not billion, $1 trillion debt. We are spending $2 trillion more than we have every year right now. The interest on the debt is insane. The left wants a massive bureaucracy, right? We know that. I'm telling you what you know already. And the question is, how can we get it under control? Where are we spending money? Where is there an appetite to cut it? I mean, we had Victor Davis Hanson on, right? At one point, all of these great societies fell, not because they were attacked or another army. Yes, some did, but because they spent too much. And we're spending way too much, and no one is stopping it, except now we've got Elon and Vivek shining a light, making it cool again to care about spending. Why doesn't any member of Congress ever tell you about one thing they're doing? Whatever happened to being a conservative that wanted to cut spending? I mean, that's what I grew up as. Like, that's why I joined the Republican Party, because I thought that's what we're for. Less government, lower taxes. Now it's just like lesser government. So I wanted to invite Mick Mulvaney on the show. He's the former director of the Office of Management and Budget under Donald Trump. He was a founding member of the Freedom Caucus when he was a member of Congress from South Carolina. No one knows this stuff better than Mick. And Russ Vought, who's going to be the incoming OMB director, was his deputy. So Mick knows all of this stuff. And I think we need to understand it if we're going to attack it. because we need to give ammunition to people to say, you want to do it? Here's what you can do. So without further ado, let me bring in the former director of the Office of Management and Budget under Donald Trump, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, good to see you. Happy New Year. I hope your family and you had a good Christmas, a good New Year.
Hello, Sean. It's lovely to see you. Of course, seeing you as the first person in 2025 is sort of make me scratch my head as to why I agreed to do this, but that's okay.
This must be this is an omen for a great 2025. So you're welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's great to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So the thing that's interesting to me is there's so much that's predicated on the budget when it comes to Donald Trump and his agenda, right? Spending this, cutting taxes. So I really think it's important because we hear a lot of sound bites in the media. And what I really want you to do as a guy that was a champion of deficit cutting and spending reduction in the Congress and then OMB director is just really give us a lay of the land of where we are. So I want to walk through this rather methodically. Okay. Let's just start with this. How much do we as a government currently spend? I mean, roughly.
I think it's $6.5 trillion. But even that is it's not misleading, but it's not the end of the discussion. The government spending is really broken into two giant buckets. There's what's called mandatory spending, also called entitlement spending. Some people don't like that term, so I just call it automatic spending, also known as off-budget spending. I want to say that's $5 trillion, $4.5 trillion this year, something like that. The biggest pieces of that are Medicare, Medicaid. Why do we call that mandatory spending, entitlement spending, automatic spending? Because that money gets spent automatically. Once you turn 65, you get Medicare. There's no bill passed every single year to set a budget for it. There's no rules set every single year. It's sort of set off all by itself, and it happens automatically by operation of law. Of course, Social Security is the same way. Once you qualify for it, you get the money. The other bucket is the discretionary budget, which is the stuff that, discretionary spending, which is what the president budgets and what Congress votes on as a budget sometimes and does in their spending bills. That's the stuff that gets spent every single year and has to be respent or at least reauthorized, reappropriated every single year. So you got those two big buckets, one mandatory, one discretionary. Together, it's almost $7 trillion next year.
Okay. So let's continue with the big picture before I want to break down mandatory and discretionary in a minute, but let's just start with continuing down the big picture path.
Yeah.
Of that $6.1 trillion-ish dollars, how much of it are we spending in terms of creating a deficit? How much do we have versus how much do we spend? What's the deficit roughly every year?
Well, right now it's about $1 trillion every 100 days. Keep in mind, just like there are two buckets for money out, there's more than one bucket for money in. The mandatory spending has its own money in. These are your Social Security taxes and your Medicare taxes. And then over on the discretionary side, you have things like the individual income tax and the corporate tax. If we're spending, let's say for sake of this discussion, let's just say it's $6 trillion and you're going to run a $2 trillion deficit, that means you're bringing in through all buckets about $4 trillion. So these are just huge numbers. By the way, Sean, to put it in perspective, it's been a long time since I wrote a budget. Last budget I wrote, I think by myself was 2000, not by myself, but Russ Vogt wrote them once I went over to be the chief of staff, was the 2018 or 19 budget. And it was just over $4 trillion. So that's how quickly the government is growing.
Okay. So for sake of argument, we spend $6 trillion, we have $4 trillion. How do we finance that $2 trillion of deficit spending? Well, I mean, if you had a credit card, you're basically, in theory, putting it on there.
Yeah, and the credit card analogy holds a little bit. We could talk about that, during the show and so forth. But generally speaking, what happens is that Treasury borrows it. And they'll go out and they say, oh, we need $2 trillion this year, so we will issue $2 trillion worth of Treasury bonds, notes, whatever, short-term bills, all of the Treasury borrowing together. We'll just call them treasuries. And they offer that out to the market, say, please lend us $2 trillion. The largest purchaser of those is the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve doesn't actually have any money, which means that technically we end up printing the money. It just goes through this sort of this kabuki dance of quantitative easing and indicating to the markets that the Federal Reserve will buy them. But the bottom line is we borrow the money and in essence then print it.
Who else owns that money?
Oh, it used to be a lot of Chinese. And I know I got this a lot back in 2010 when I was running for Congress. Foreign nations owned a bunch of them. That is actually winding off. The Chinese have slowed their purchases of treasuries. So they actually, I think now are net shrinking the size of their treasury holdings. Right now, the largest purchaser of our debt is the Federal Reserve.
So in the same way that if you need to spend $10, you have $8 and you come to me and say, can I borrow $2? I give you the $2 and then there's interest on that, right? So when they float these bonds, that's another big chunk of the budget, right? Paying them back.
Yeah. Back in 2017, 18, I think the budget for what we spent on interest was about $350 billion. It's going to be close to $1 trillion this year. So yes, the interest carry is a real thing, just like it is on your credit card bill. Again, the credit card breaks down a little bit when you realize that you sort of have to figure out a way to give the analogy of you owning a printing press in your basement, because that's what the government does. But yeah, the credit card analogy holds to the extent that interest is real. We have to pay it, and we do pay it, and it's about $1 trillion this year. Okay,
one more number because I want to get back to the interest for a second.
Yeah.
So our total, that's our deficit. What we run every year, we're about $2 trillion that we're running a deficit. That gets added to the debt, what we owe totality-wise in terms of a country. Where's that stand right now?
Yeah, and by the way, that's an important distinction that not a lot of people, including some elected officials, don't make. The deficit is what we are short this year. The debt is the accumulated shortfalls from the beginning of time. That number, the debt, is about $36 trillion.
Okay, and last question on that before we move backwards a little. When you say from the beginning of time, I know that that's just a turn of phrase, but the reality is that debt, that national debt, that $36 trillion has pretty much come in the modern era, right?
Oh, yeah. But the federal government, I don't think the federal government has ever been entirely out of debt. I could be wrong about that. Maybe early in the 19th century we were. But generally speaking, the government has always held a little bit of a debt. When you look at the graph and you look at the changes in the way the government operated, the debt, the deficits, and then the accumulated deficits, the debt, really started exploding in 1980 or thereabouts. Which is one of the stories I tell when people say, oh, I can't believe the Democrats have done this to us. No. It takes two parties to get you $36 trillion in debt. Think about who the president was.
It's a lot of people that spend, it's like a bar tab.
It's really hard to spend that much money without everybody doing it to you. So yeah, it took off about 1980. That's when Republicans realized that they can cut taxes and Democrats realized they could increase spending. They'd have to borrow a bunch of money to do those things, but no one lost their job in Washington because of it. So that's when this sort of modern unholy alliance of reducing taxes and also increasing spending came together.
All right, so let's work backwards for a second. We talked about interest on the debt. You said it's just north of $1 trillion, right? So if we're spending $6 trillion and basically 1/6 of it is interest payments on the debt, that would seem to me that we're crowding out a lot of other opportunities.
You think so, but we don't, because in the real world it would. And I suppose eventually it would, but I mean, I've been doing this eventually thing now for 15 years. I feel like the crazy guy on the corner holding up a sign saying, repent, the end of the world is nigh. Sooner or later, that guy's going to be right. But he hasn't been so far, and neither have I. Yes, it does tend, the spending the money does tend to crowd out. But when you can simply borrow more money, what difference does it make? And that's how Washington has looked at it. They're like, oh my goodness, yes, we have $1 trillion we have to pay in interest this year. That's $1 trillion that we don't have to spend on fill in the blank, the military, welfare, whatever's important to you. So what do? We'll just go borrow another $1 trillion to fill the hole that the other $1 trillion worth of interest payments has left. So yeah, that's how you do end up in that cycle.
But we had Victor Davis Hanson on the show earlier.
Yeah.
And he was like, going back to Constantinople, if you actually look at interest versus outlays for national defense, when the interest exceeds the spending on national defense, that's when great societies, great countries collapse. And we have reached that point.
Yeah. Well, most great nations don't fail from the outside. They rot from the inside, and they do it through the debasement of the currency, which is really what we're doing when we print all of this money. You can go back and look at the Roman Empire, and what they essentially did is they have a silver coin that was 100% silver, and then 100 years later it was 2% silver. They debased the currency. We're doing the modern version of that by printing and borrowing so that we can pay for what we've already spent.
All right, so let's continue into the discretionary stuff. Actually, yeah, on the discretionary stuff, that funds stuff like education, defense, right? Yeah. There's a lot of times when people want to talk about making cuts. That's primarily where they're talking about, right?
Is it? I mean, yeah, yes. I mean, that's, again, Washington loves the fact that no one understands their language. There was a very prominent Republican who wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal just before Christmas saying our real problem is mandatory spending. And they love to say that, so it takes the eyes off of discretionary spending that they vote on every single year. So it looks like it's not really their fault that we're $36 trillion in debt. But the discretionary budget is not big enough to make up the shortfall, right? You could cut the discretionary budget to zero and we'd still be in a deficit this year. That's how big the interest payments are.
Hold on. Repeat that for 1 second. So you're talking defense,
no
education.
Money for defense. No
right.
Defense, transportation, education, all of the discretionary budget. Again, Social Security, Medicare is over here in the mandatory bucket. But take the alphabet soup: USDA, FBI, CIA, FDA, all of that, DOD. Okay, you could cut that to zero this year, and we would still be in deficit.
I mean, when you stop and pause and realize what that means, that's how bad we're in, right? Okay, so let me just keep going down this route.
And I don't want to. You know me. One of the reasons that I don't have as many friends in Washington as I would probably like is that I'm happy to blow up my own party from time to time when they do things that make no sense to me. But there was a recent press conference when a bunch of senators got together and said, "Oh, we love this Doge thing, and what we are going to look at is getting rid of the penny." And that's going to be a big deal because we lose a lot of money on making the penny. It costs us 3 cents to make a penny or something like that. And it's true. And it is wasteful, and you should get rid of it. Sean, it's hard to imagine how small that affects our deficits.
I'm glad you brought that up, though.
Yeah.
Because I always tell people, leading into the 1994 contract with America, Newt Gingrich walked around with an ice bucket. And viewers of the show know how many times I've used this example. And it costs like $200,000. 5 staffers brought ice around to members' offices so that they could have their afternoon drinks, right? And now, obviously, they have free. I mean, you know this from being a member of Congress. You have a refrigerator and a freezer. But some kid's friend's brother knew a member of Congress and got this patronage job, and Newt Gingrich cut it. And here's the point that I would make. I get it. That saved $200,000. The penny saves what? Call it $1 million, $2 million. But if you don't respect that, then how are you ever? I mean, that's my concern. Is that we've gotten to a point in Washington where it's like, that's only $1 million. Hey, I'll take $1 million.
No, you're spot on, right? Which is, I said, look, it's important, but my problem is with people who say we're going to fix it by doing that.
Oh, right.
I have friends of mine who say, you know what? The real problem here is foreign aid. That is a laughable proposition. You could cut foreign aid for all the foreign aid we've ever given in the history of the country, including the Marshall Plan, and it still wouldn't dent that $36 trillion deficit that we have. The numbers are so big, and our attention is sometimes on these really small things that we sort of lose sight of how we got here.
All right, so I want to continue with discretionary for just a minute, knowing the context in which we're discussing this and the impact it would really have.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about real money with the entitlement. But as I said, I look at it as a sign of respect. I go to work every day, you go to work every day, and the government says, I want you to send me this much money. And my view is, I get it. I'm an American. I'm proud to live in this country. And I get that there's a cost to it. To be free, to be protected by a military, to be supported by various agencies and whatever that are looking out, that I drive on the roads. I get it. There's a cost. but I only want to pay as many pennies as I have to
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to work as much. I mean, let's just be honest. And I want some respect for the dollars that I send to Washington. So put me inside the role of a member of Congress, because I have brought this up before. For example, why in the day and age that we live in today do we need government funding for PBS and NPR and the National Endowment for the Humanities?
Okay. By the way, and you're absolutely right. And I don't want to diminish the efforts to be efficient everywhere we possibly can. You talk about the ice buckets. I wasn't there. I don't remember that. When I got to Congress, we still had people sitting on the elevators punching the buttons for us. Not making that up. That's changed. Okay. So I'm not trying to discredit that. That is
no. And I know you're not. I know you're not.
It.
You're just trying to put it into perspective.
I'm trying to put it.
But I guess
you need to solve that and 15 million other things. So why doesn't it change? And why is it so hard to change? I'm trying to figure out the analogies to give. People don't understand what baseline budgeting, which is the Congress doesn't go back to zero every single year and start from scratch on its budget. It's too big. They make the argument, well, we can't do that. There's not enough time in the year. So what we do essentially said, okay, this is what we spent last year. We're going to use that as a base. Where are we going to increase our spending for next year? They also say we're going to look at reduction, but we never really do.
Right. Okay. So walk me through my example. I'm congressman from, who cares, from Virginia. I go into the state of the Republican conference. Guys and ladies, we all know that we're principled conservatives. PBS and NPR are a complete anathema to what we believe in terms of free and fair competition.
Sure.
Should we cut this? And everybody says, yeah. Then why does it? Why can't we just stop it?
I'll give you a real world example. Okay. I cut the PBS budget in the president's proposed budget of 2017. Okay. PBS doesn't need our money anymore. The government subsidy for them is a small portion of what they could do. They could sell ads. They could do a bunch of things. They don't need the dough. Yet here we are, talk about respect for the taxpayers, giving money to effectively the progressive side of the country so they can promote their own agendas and so forth. That's wrong. It was a taxpayer protection budget in 2017. This is a wonderful example. Okay. Well, I went to the president and said, look, here's what I want to do. By the way, there's going to be some high profile cuts. And one of these is PBS. And he looks at me and goes, well, I'm good with that, because all my friends got plenty of money. They could give more money to it.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, wait, finish. And of course, then the Democrats in the Senate go, oh my God, Donald Trump hates Big Bird. Big Bird. He hates Big Bird. What is he? He hates the children of America. He's gutting this program. He hates you. He hates poor people. He hates young people. He hates whatever. I can't believe he's doing this. And in the Oval Office, okay, you had gone by then, but you would know the name. I will not give the person's name out. That's not the purpose of this. There was a Republican member of the senior team who said, Mr. President, we can't do this. We can't be seen as being too harsh on PBS and Big Bird. We have to fund this. It's just not worth the PR hit that we are taking. That was a Republican senior advisor to the president.
And I know you know this, but I, as a previous staffer to the budget committee, one of the dirty secrets about PBS is the following. They basically license shows. So Sesame Street is a product. If you actually listen to the show,
it's for profit.
It's a for-profit. Big Bird's a millionaire. He makes a boatload of cash, or whatever his pronouns are. Big Bird is a millionaire.
Do you know who owns the Muppets now? It's Disney, for crying out loud. So, this happened. But there are Republicans. Look, I sat in there in 2018 with my 2017 with my 2018 budget. I got a call. One of the very first calls I got from the president. I was over at OMB. He calls me. He says, yeah, Mick, I need you to come down here right now. I said, yes, Mr. President. I haven't been there very often. I go down, and there, sitting across the Resolute desk, is a very high-ranking Republican senator. And the president calls me. He says, Mick, come in. Senator so-and-so's got some problems with your budget. I said, yes, sir. I figured he probably would. Sit down. And the president looks at the senator, goes, now, Senator, tell him what you just told me. So, Mr. President, I'm happy to say it. I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Mulvaney. Everybody knows he's one of the best guys in town with numbers. He understands the budget better than probably anybody. And this budget would probably be something that made Ronald Reagan smile from a philosophical standpoint. But let me tell you one thing, Mr. President. There's one difference between you and him. You are elected. He is not. And nobody has ever lost their job in this town for spending too much money. People have lost their job for not spending enough. Now, how do you feel about Mr. Mulvaney's budget? And that, Sean, was the end of fiscal conservatism in the Trump administration.
Is there, okay, what about members? Okay, that's from the executive to Congress. Is there any way, I mean, what I have argued is start to shame people into spending issues, right? So start to run around and say, who wants to defend PBS? Who wants to defend it? And start with the Congress and move the other way, because according to the Constitution, actually, technically speaking, Congress has the power of the purse.
Well, look at what just happened before Christmas. On that very first vote they had before Christmas on the continuing resolution. What is a continuing resolution? A continuing resolution is a bill that says, look, we don't have the time, we don't have the interest, we don't have the ability right now to sort of plan for next year. So what we're going to do on sort of a short-term basis is take whatever we spent last year and spend it again this year. Okay, $2 trillion in deficit last year. $2 trillion in deficit last year. And all but 33 Republicans just voted and said, you know what, that's good enough for next year. Let's take last year's model and spend it again next year for at least part of the year. All but 3 dozen Republicans voted for that.
The thing that was funny, I thought this is where you're going to go, but like the thing about this was, I agree with you. I'm a purist. You want to find a continuing resolution, go for it, because that is continue spending until we get our act together, right? And what did they throw in that first 1,547-page bill? A pay raise for themselves, exempting themselves from Obamacare, moving the Commanders NFL stadium. That's not a continuing resolution. That's a Christmas tree.
Yeah, but that never came to the vote. That never came to the vote. Yeah.
By the way, what was this to your example? What was the thing? You're cutting cancer research.
Yeah, that was in a previous. That was the one that didn't come up for the vote. That was in the 15.
Right, but my point is,
yes,
there's always some.
There's a lot of folks who are willing to vote for that. Right.
But so generally, I guess what I'm trying to get at, and what I want people to understand, is should they have any hope that we can actually cut spending, get rid of, I mean, we did it in 94. I felt like at least slowed the rate of growth. I mean, that's the other dirty
No, you did. Yeah, you slowed the rate. Keep in mind, that's a critical word you just used. You slow the rate of growth. And in Washington, that's a cut. Okay. I'm not making this up, Sean. If you
No. I want people to understand what you're saying, though. Let's role play this. Mick, I have $5 this year. Can I have 10 next year?
Yeah, that's a cut.
No. Then you say, give me 8. I'll give you 8. And I go, you cut my budget too.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. So the language is different in Washington, D.C. But go back to the question, which is really the $64,000 question. Is there hope? There will be once voters change their policies, once voters change their attitude. Keep in mind, that Republican sitting in the Oval Office with the president in 2017 was right. No one's ever lost his job in Washington, D.C. for spending too much money. And until the voters, if you put yourself in the voters, this is a representative government. So here I am, I'm a member of Congress. My folks back home, last year I spent way too much money. I went deficit spending. Then I went back to my people, said, please reelect me. And they did. Why would I change my position? Why would I change my voting policy? If you just gave me your seal of approval, why would I continue to do what I've done before you voted for me? So yeah, the voters have to change. Right now, there's a group of voters who really like the spending. Most of them tend to be on the left of center, but certainly not all of them. Typically, Sean, what I like to say is Republicans and Democrats like to spend as much money as each other. They just like to spend it on different things. Republicans like to spend it on defense. Democrats like to spend it on social welfare programs. But they like to spend. And until the voters decide, you know what, I'm going to vote for somebody who wants to spend less, it is not going to change.
All right, let me ask you this. If you got the pen again to write a budget,
yeah,
and you were asked by the powers that be, we need to cut on the discretionary side X millions of dollars just off the bat. We need to find some illustrative things to show the American people we're serious about this. Could you come up with 10 things that, I'm not saying they have to add up to a ton,
yeah.
but
we came up with 10,000 things, but there's an easier answer to your question, which is everybody deals with a penny less next year. Everybody, including the Defense Department. You got $100 last year, you get $99 this year. Figure out how to do that. And when the leaders come in, including the generals, and say we can't do it, you fire them and find somebody who can. I had a conversation with James Mattis early in 2017 about the Defense Department budget. And the president and I were negotiating on what the top line defense spending would be. And the president wanted a bigger number than I wanted, which is fine. He is the president. And I said, well, Mr. President, look, what if we do a deal where we do what you've done, but we take your higher number, but we give the military an incentive to save money. And if they spend less, they can actually have some of that to spend on other projects that they like, an efficiency bonus, so to speak.
Whoa!
Okay. I called, and the Mattis came in and said, well, Mick, this is a very interesting thing. Now, look, we've talked about efficiencies and so forth. Now, last year, you've got a 2% goal in there for us for efficiency. Now, last year, our goal on efficiency was 1%, that we couldn't hit it. But this year, I'm really satisfied that I think we've got a chance to hit our budget this year, our targets on efficiency. And I said, Jim, what's your target for efficiencies this year? He said, our target for efficiencies this year is 0. And I think we can hit that.
We know how much waste is there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But look, the military's never had to do it less. So if you've been in the military for 40 years and you've never had to do it less, you're not going to know how to do it. It's going to take really, really strong leadership. And it's going to take voters who say that's what they want to do. Listen, I don't want to beat up on the Defense Department. It is 1/2 of the discretionary budget. So if you want to look to save money, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is.
Right. But I would argue that, look, we have a 285 fleet Navy. We're well below 300. The Chinese army is going up. If I'm going to spend something, I'll spend it protecting my freedom. But I agree with you that doesn't mean you spend it willy-nilly and keep propping up ships that won't ever, go to sea again.
Right. But look, there's only 2 things that the government has to do. Believe it or not. Do you know what they are in the Constitution? There's 2 things.
Interest on the debt.
No.
Maintain an army and a navy.
Defend the nation and deliver the mail. That's the 2 things that it actually has to. There's a bunch of other stuff it can do it in Article 1, Section 8. But generally speaking, yes, you have to defend the nation. I'm not making the point. I'm not saying we shouldn't defend the nation. I'm just saying, look, can you be better at it? Can you be more efficient at it? Is the number of ships really the right measure, or is it your ability to project power overseas and do missiles and satellites make up for a lack of ships? Are we fighting the last war? Are we still fighting World War II in Vietnam? And while our adversaries are looking at fighting the next war in space and encrypt and cyber and so forth. Those are discussions that you have to have. And those are discussions that oftentimes take place when there's fiscal pressure, when you're forced to make decisions. And again, I don't want to beat up on the military. That's not the point of this conversation.
I know.
You could have this about every particular agency. It's just it is such a big chunk of what we spend on the discretionary budget.
All right, I want to move to entitlements. But before I do that, there was an interesting anecdote that your former deputy, Russ Vought, the incoming OMB director,
great guy,
made on another podcast that I want to just ask you about. He was basically saying, let's say that we in the executive find an agency and we say, wow, we can make reductions in that agency or we can eliminate it. He said, based on a ruling, because if Congress appropriates money, we cannot not spend it.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
Oh, no, that's it. There's a specific, and by the way, I'm a huge Russ Vought fan. He's going to be great at OMB. OMB is Doge without the name, right? OMB, really, Doge doesn't exist. It's a PR campaign. The guys that are actually going to do the work are OMB, and they're going to be really good at it. Russ, I can't say highly enough about him, and Dan Bishop, a former congressman who's now his deputy. But back in 2017, a specific example, we proposed a reduction in spending at the Department of State. I can't remember how many employees Department of State has. Let's say, for sake of this discussion, it's 40,000 people. And we said, you know what? They don't need 40,000 people. They can run it with 35. So let's write a budget that assumes they have 35,000 people. When it got to Congress, there was a Republican senator on the Foreign Affairs Committee who essentially went in and in the appropriations bill mandated that the State Department employ 40,000 people. Literally tied the hands of the Trump administration so that we couldn't do what we wanted to do. And what Russ was probably talking about was impoundment, which is whether or not the president is obligated to spend the money that Congress says he has to spend. It's a fascinating area of law. I'm very much looking forward to impoundment fight in the coming days. No one would be better at it than Donald Trump and Russ Vought. But yeah, right now, Congress essentially takes the position, if we tell the president he has to spend it, he must spend it.
So like the last month of the year, the last couple of weeks, when I was on active duty, I mean, those guys, it's like whatever's left in your budget, it's
spend it, baby. Use it or lose it.
Use it. Yep. Yeah. How ridiculous. I mean, that's insane. Use it or lose it. Spend away. You get no incentive to stay.
I I had an Air Force base in my district when I was in Congress. Guys used to tell me, plus, look, I got told to go up today and dump fuel. Fly up, dump fuel, land, reload, fly up, dump fuel, land, to do it again. Because if we don't spend our whole fuel budget for the year, we don't get it again for next year.
Yeah, this is insane.
Yeah.
All right.
Look at me. Look at me. I'm 27 years old. Look what working for the federal government has done for me for a while.
Yeah. I mean,
that's a joke, Sean. That's a joke.
I know. I also just think it's so backwards in terms of principle. Like we're a free market capitalistic society, and yet we employ this government that's almost like communist in its spending. It's, we can't save money. We must spend. We must take more. Let's move to the other side of the aisle. You mentioned robbing banks, where the money is. This is where the real money is. Again, let's walk through what makes up entitlement spending and what the drivers of the deficit are within that.
Well, by the way, it's a really interesting turn of phrase, because every time, and the gentleman who wrote the piece in the Wall Street Journal said, the real problem with our deficits is mandatory spending. Sean, do you know how much of the $36 trillion debt, give me a percentage, within 5%, the $36 trillion in debt, how much of that is attributable to Social Security today?
God, I feel like it's a trick question.
It is a trick question. The answer is zero. None.
Zero.
But Social Security is not allowed to go into debt.
Right.
Social Security it can't go into debt.
But isn't it full of IOUs?
Yeah, but the IOUs are to the government. So it's the government debt. They've been lending money to the government. It's the government spending that drives that debt, not the spending within Social Security. Social Security is actually still has a trust fund. The trust fund still exists. It's a locked cabinet in West Virginia. I've seen it before. We can do a whole show on
no way.
Social
There's
Security.
really it's like Al Gore. There's really a lockbox.
Just a lockbox. Yes. Sorry, that's my Donald Trump doing my Al Gore. I apologize for that. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lockbox in West Virginia full of T-bills and stuff. But look, mandatory spending is a big deal. There's no question about it. It's this looming deficit. Keep in mind, Social Security, the trust fund is empty in about 12 years. When that happens, then they're only allowed to spend what they take in on a regular basis, which they're taking in about 80% of what they need right now, which means the day I turn 65, I'll only get about 80% of my benefits unless something changes. That's real. Medicare right now is a huge drag on the deficit. Medicaid is a large drag on the deficit and so forth. These are huge things. They are fixable. Donald Trump, by the way, proposed in the budget of 2018 the largest mandatory reduction in history, and did not touch old age retirement and Social Security, and did not touch what we call mainline Medicare, the Medicaid medical coverage you get when you turn 65. What a lot of people don't realize is that over the course of the last 2 generations, these funds, Medicare and Social Security primarily, turn into these huge pots of money. And Sean, you know what happens when there's a huge pot of money just sitting around in Washington, D.C. It gets spent. And so for right now, when you pay, a lot of folks don't know this, you may not know this, when you pay your payroll tax every single week and you pay Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes, you're paying for something called Social Security disability, which has nothing to do with old age. And you also pay for medical school tuition supplements. To help people go to medical school out of your Medicare taxes. Folks don't know that. That's not what they think Medicare is. It's not what they think Social Security is. And we tried to reform those in Donald Trump's programs, budget, and everybody on the Hill, including Democrats, Republicans.
So is it financial aid for med students?
Yeah, part of Medicare. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And that was our point and we try to drive that home. Look, there's so much you can do to save money in Medicare and not deny a single person health care coverage. There's so much you can do in Social Security and not deny anybody the benefits when they turn 62 or 65 or 67. But it's so easy to demagogue. Right. I mean, you hear it all the time. Oh, they're coming after Social Security. Okay. Technically, that's correct. We're not coming after the part of the Social Security you care about, but yes, we're coming after Social Security. They want to change Social Security as we know it. Yeah, that's right, but it's not the part you think you know. It's the stuff you don't know about.
Okay, so let's just say hypothetically, in any one of these programs, you can find efficiencies, right?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, we can start to, I remember back a few years ago, they started requiring direct deposit, okay? I'm sure that saved, who knows, not a ton, but some money. on a bipartisan basis, you go to members of the other party and say, guys, we can extend the solvency of this program by doing these 5 reforms. Is their answer immediately to demagogue you, or do they buy into, hey, it actually looks good if we're extending the solvency of these programs, so I'll join with you?
Yeah, it depends on how close you are to an election and who you're dealing with. Social Security is relatively easy to fix in terms of a mathematical. I'm not talking about politics, I'm talking about math. Because Social Security is a defined contribution, defined benefit plan. And when you deal with the tens and hundreds of millions of people, it becomes fairly easy to project. It's the actuarial sort of analysis you do on any insurance program. And we know how much money's coming in, we know how much money's going out. And so there's a way to fix that by changing some of the levers. Do the taxes go up? Does the cap go away? Do the ages change? Do the benefits get limited if you make a bunch of money? Donald Trump has said many times he doesn't need Social Security. There's ways to tweak the system to make the system viable and liquid again. Politically very difficult, mathematically relatively easy. Medicare is entirely different because Medicare is a defined contribution, undefined, unlimited benefit program. You pay your Medicare taxes, and if you turn 77 and you qualify for a hip replacement, you get it regardless of how much it costs. And that is a much more difficult program to fix mathematically. My point is that we can't fix the thing about the penny over on the discretionary budget. We can't fix the 1 cent across, not making pennies anymore. We can't fix the getting rid of the waste within the Department of Education. If we can't do that, how are we going to fix Social Security and Medicare? That's part of my concern with Washington these days, is that they keep talking about, we need to fix entitlements. Well, if you can't fix the easy stuff, how are you going to fix the hard stuff?
So, as we begin this new year, is
very
there
cheerful.
any hope?
It's a very cheerful start to 2020.
No. But I think it's context. We're going to have these fights. I think people need to understand what we're up against. But is there any hope? Is there a sense ever of, hey, let's actually get our act together, do our job, be serious, and try to save the future? Or is that, to your point about elections, it's like, screw it, that's somebody else's problem?
I'll give you the cynical answer, then I'll give you the hopeful answer. My cynical answer is no, it doesn't change. Washington doesn't lead, it follows, it does what the voters want, etc. And it very rarely fixes things before they are broken. We fix things we react, we are not proactive in Washington, D.C., and that's the cynical answer. So my cynical answer is no, it won't get fixed. Medicare won't get fixed until it runs out of dough. Social Security won't get fixed until people realize they got less money coming in, and the deficit won't get fixed until there's a failed treasury issue or something like that. That's an economic shock. If I wanted to be more hopeful, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have done something that I tried desperately to do, but they're smarter and better at this than I am, which is they've made this a cause now. They've made it sexy. They've made it interesting to people. Ordinary folks now care much more about the deficit and about government efficiencies than they did when I was trying to pitch this to Donald Trump. I used to call it civil service reform, for example. What a terrible name. I was no good at the PR part of it, the selling part of it. If now Vivek and Elon and Trump can sort of get the public behind these changes, the necessary changes, then there's the chance for the first time in my lifetime of actually doing something about it.
It's like that great phrase from the movie Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance. Well, look, Mick, I can't thank you enough for giving us this primer on the budget, because I think not only do we need to know where we're at right now budget-wise, but the challenges that we face. So I appreciate the time, and I feel like I've just gotten college credit for this. But I wish you and your family all the best in 2025, and hopefully there really is a chance. Thank you for being with us.
Happy New Year, my friend. I'll see you soon.
You bet. Wow, that was a sobering discussion. I wanted you guys to start 2025 off understanding what we're up against. But at least now we know what we're up against, what forces. And we've had a lot of successes. The election of Donald Trump, corporate DEI policies going out. So knowing what we know now, I think we can attack this and do it right. Do me a favor, share this episode with friends. Help educate them as to where we are as a government, what we're facing, the forces against us. Send it to 5 friends and say, you want to understand what's going on in the government? Here it is. That will be your New Year's gift to me. Thank you very much for doing that. By the way, I've told you before, if you want it, we voted for change. We're going to get it in a few days with Donald Trump. I vote for change every day with my wallet, though. I have found a company where I can actually get household goods and items, soap, shampoo, cleaning supplies that comport with my values. It's a family-owned manufacturer. It's almost everything is made in the U.S., and all of the ingredients are non-toxic. That means they don't even need a safety cap. The beauty products meet or exceed European standards, and it all comes from one place. It's a total check. You can go to this site. I'm going to give you it in just a second, and you are not giving your money to Amazon or Walmart. I love it. It's just such a better deal. You know you're supporting U.S. jobs, conservative values, non-toxic products. So do me a favor. Over 2 million families have already changed. Text this number, 276-500-1185. 276-500-1185. I'll send you a video to tell you what I'm talking about. And then I've been shopping now for months. It's great. I love the change that it's made. So I'm so excited for this. We've got a great week headed your way next week. I'm excited. Thank you for kicking off 2025 for us. Always go to my Substack newsletter column, SeanSpicer.com. It's free to sign up. You're always welcome to be a VIP member. I look forward to seeing you back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.